to be talking about IHT a lot more recently. Everybody seems to be worried. Is this just media frenzy, or is there something real going on here?
Oh, it's absolutely real. I mean, the fact that we've got a room full of people who come out in a rainy night to find out more about it just demonstrates how important it is now. And a lot of that's come, 2009 was the last time the thresholds for inheritance tax were increased. So we've had £325,000 since then, and that's frozen to at least 2030. I mean, just with inflation, it should have been up to about 800,000 by 2030. So you can see how much tax people are paying purely on inflation. The average house price has still been going up over that time, and now we're seeing the average house within a mile of here is at least £1 million to £1.5 million. So most people don't actually have any allowance left because it's just used up with their main house. I mean, and also with the nil rate band also frozen, £175,000 per person, meaning once someone gets over 2 million of an estate, you start to lose that extra allowance quite dramatically at £1 for every £2 you go over. So what that means is you're charged 60% inheritance tax if you're in the 2 to 2.5 million rate. And these are big numbers. I mean, the average inheritance tax seemed like a mere £220,000 last year, but in this area you're looking at more like £400,000. So it's very, very big numbers we're talking about, and that's why it's so important.
Wow, okay, those are real eye-opener numbers. And Kat, what are you finding when you talk to clients? What's worrying them? What's keeping them awake at night?
I think the way the media works nowadays doesn't help. Clickbait and sensational sort of headlines. Certainly the way that the budget was planned in 2024, I get that right, there was this big delay. It created a lot of anxiety around things like pensions, and 25% tax-free cash might be disappearing, but also inheritance tax. So I think there's a general sort of feeling of anxiety, and there's definitely a vibe of the Chancellor's coming to get your money. And yes, Labour are looking for ways to raise more taxes, and they see inheritance as a very easy one to go after.
Yeah, I mean, there's barely a day this isn't in the headlines, and that is stoking fear, but as Darren says, there's reason behind it.
Yeah, and so just to add to that, I think from a generational perspective, the bank of mum and dad is so much more important than it ever was. But if there's a risk that the bank might be getting raided again, that creates an extra fear about making sure that your children are provided for, and their deposits for houses, things like that, and student loans are paid off. So that sort of handing money down is becoming more important than it's ever been.
Yeah, hot topic. And Rachel, you run our probate department. When families come to you, when sadly they've recently lost someone, what are they wishing that they've done sooner that they haven't done?
So I think the really common thing that I'm seeing, it's a relatively new service for us, but one of the big things that's coming out is really about having those conversations sooner, those difficult conversations sooner that perhaps we don't want to have, but hopefully things like tonight can help to kind of start that moving. Do the planning early, have the kind of open, difficult conversations sooner to avoid some of the pitfalls that we see, which is things like maybe there's no will in place, or there is a will but nobody's quite sure where it is, and then we might find that somebody's actually, the will's not, we can't find the will, and that creates a whole load of complexities. Outdated wills, more and more of a big issue here, and same with pension nominations, with things like the increase in blended families, different configurations of families, changes in relationships. So that's always a big thing, to make sure that you're keeping everything up to date. And if you're not doing those things, the emotional toll and the practical toll for people that are left behind can be really significant. It means that people are having to make big decisions under a lot of pressure, quickly, at a time when they're going through, a really difficult time anyway. And so that's what's really important. That's a big thing that I would say, is have those conversations now while you can. It might feel a little bit awkward, but much better to have that than experience some of the kind of big pitfalls that we see.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody here tonight is already one step ahead of the game, so, well done all of you. Brilliant. So, moving on, we want to talk now about the rule change. April 2027, this keeps coming up this date. Have I got the right slide?
Yeah, I think I covered the numbers, but is everyone aware that the 325,000 is everybody's personal allowance?
175,000 is what's called the residence nil rate band, which is an extra allowance if you pass down your property to bloodline relatives. So most people, these are joint between a couple and they can be shared, which means you can get up to £1 million in total allowance. Now the big one, the pension. And the biggest change to inheritance tax pretty much ever in my lifetime, which is, my wife keeps saying it's quite a while, is that from April 2027, pensions will be inheritance taxable. So that means any money in a pension, when somebody dies, will be taxed at 40%. There's various different ways that tax can be paid. Pension fund can pay it. It can be paid from the main estate, which then leads on to some taxation offset. It is hugely complex. Pension companies are not renowned for being efficient in the best of times, and now we're seeing that pension companies really panic about how they're going to be able to pay this tax. Some of the older pension companies haven't got much of an idea how they're going to be able to integrate that with other pension companies and with estates and lawyers, and it's going to become extremely complicated, particularly for the unfortunate people that die shortly after it comes into force. We're seeing it really impact people's inheritance tax who would not have had too much inheritance tax to pay, if any, to people that are now going to be pushed over the 2 million. I saw a client last week and they are early retirees, house is nearly £1 million, and they have about £500,000 in savings and investments. So there was a little bit of inheritance tax to pay, but he's just retired from the bank and he's got £1 million in the pension fund. So we've now got to really look at where they should take their income from, because that money in the pension fund from April next year will mean that they're not only going to be taxed 40% on it, but they're going to lose their nil rate band on most of it, which means they'll be paying 60% inheritance tax. So
Wow, did I hear that right? 60%?
60% inheritance tax, yeah. And that's not the end of it with pensions, because if someone does die after the age of 75, which is normal, the person receiving the money then has to pay income tax on what's left. So in effect, £1 million pension fund becomes £600,000, and then if you give it to your successful son, who is an additional rate taxpayer, he could lose another 45% of it. I mean, doesn't necessarily mean he has to access it, and there's good planning. You can, give it to the grandchildren and try and jump generations, but ultimately, it's possible. You can, I believe, get to in excess of 80 to 90% tax on the pension fund if you're giving it to an additional rate taxpayer and losing your residential nil rate band as well. So it's huge, and therefore the planning is who you should leave the pension to, who you should leave other assets, and then how should you pay the tax on the pension.
Those are really frightening, big numbers. So we've got a window to act. Kat, what would you say to clients who came to you who had a large pension pot?
Spend it. Yeah.
Nice problem to have, eh?
Apart from spend it. So it's really, if you have got a big pension pot, it's really important that you review your drawdown strategy. That's the advisor phrase for how you take it. So it might be that you review whether you take money out of a pension or whether it comes out of savings or ISAs. Really important also that your pension and your will is aligned. So all pensions have what we call an expression of wish, and it's essentially telling the trustees of the pension fund where you want that pension to go. If that's not aligned to your will, it can cause no end of problem, which Rachel unfortunately has to sort out during probate. Another thing is also consolidation of pensions, without going too much into Rachel's area around probate. If you get into probate and you have got small pensions that are going to be part of the estate for inheritance tax after April 27, that they could be tiny and they could be with old providers who literally will go down to the basement to find your file. There are some providers still out there who do that. that can hold up probate. So it's really about getting the house in order, making sure your will and your pension, especially because you're aligned, and really, to what Rachel said, have that conversation with your family. Can be a bit of an interesting one to approach, but it will save a lot of heartache later if everyone understands how things are going to pan out.
So there's a lot to think about, but there is lots you can do as well, isn't there? So let's talk about some strategies. Let's talk about what actually works. Darren, over to you.
What actually works? We don't give it all away, which is not a bad strategy. Most people should plan. Understand what you really need, not what you've got. Allowing for a buffer, but people do tend to, and we see it, not a week or a month goes by with someone not coming into the office and saying, Uncle Albert, Auntie Muriel's just died and didn't think they had any money. We were taking food packages around once a week, and it turns out they got £300,000-400,000 in the bank. And it's because they haven't spoken to anybody and they haven't planned, and now the tax man just takes 40%. So, it's make a plan. Use what we call ski and gifts. Ski is spending the children's or kids' inheritance, and gifts. I mean, the main allowances are up on the screen there. Everybody can give £3,000, so it's between a couple's £12,000. It may not seem huge, but over time it adds up, and with 40% tax being saved, it's not difficult after 10 years to have saved, £40,000 or so if you keep gifting. It's really important to use all these allowances and making sure that you keep good records. Was the next about the gift 7-year rule? Yes, and gifting. So when you go beyond your allowances and you've got enough money for yourself, the key thing is to try and gift as much as you can to the family. We can talk about trusts in a moment, but as a key thing that I want you all to understand with the 7-year gift rule, it's always, people think there's a taper on the gift, and there's no taper on the gift, it's a taper on the tax.
Darren, could you just explain what the taper is? Because I don't know.
Okay. When you make a gift, it still stays as your money in your estate for 7 years. If that gift's worth more than £325,000, it becomes taxable because that's your personal allowance. So you've given away your personal allowance. Any gift under that amount uses your personal allowance up should you die within 7 years. So it hasn't changed, it hasn't tapered or anything, and a lot of people think it would have. If you were to give away £500,000, so you're over your allowance by £175,000, that £175,000 would be taxable at 40%. It's that tax which reduces the further you are away from having given the money until it's gone down to 0 at year 7. So it's really important that people understand that if they're gifting, the taper only affects them when they've given away at least £325,000.
It's all pretty technical, but don't worry, all these numbers will be in your packs later. And just pity me because this is what my date nights are like. So, okay, so that's gifting, 7-year rule. Brilliant. And Kat, how do we make sure that we're not being too generous? It's such a lovely idea, bank mum and dad, give the kids a start in life now, get their first home, let's all have a wonderful holiday. That's fantastic, but what happens if suddenly you need it? Maybe you need to go into a care home or something.
Well, this is not one of the favourite parts of my job because we have all this nice software and we can plug all the figures in and look at how much money you can take. And I talk a lot about porridge when I'm selling clients. And the porridge theory is it's about making sure that you've got enough to enjoy the lifestyle you want to have now, but you don't spend so fast or gift so fast that you spend your late retirement eating porridge because you spent it too quick. So yeah,
Lovely though porridge is and very healthy.
Very healthy, but it's straight porridge, no fancy nuts on top. So yeah, cash flow modelling, really important. Understanding as to how much money you want to have and enjoy in retirement, and what surplus to requirements. And obviously, we do look at the more technical side of actually how will your investments still be growing, because a lot of people, and I see this daily, they can't spend their pension pots quick enough or their investments quick enough if they are replenishing themselves. So it's that upping how much they spend or gift, and so that we are actually eating into the capital. So that's a big thing. One of the things we sort of see, and my background before I became a financial advisor, I used to work in the charity sector, is sort of seeing the joy of your gifts. So a lot of people, because they're uncertain of how much they can afford to give away, they wait until they've gone to give that money to their children or their grandchildren, or quite often the same happens if they want to leave a legacy to a charity. And I'm all for, actually, let's do that planning, work out how much you can afford to give away now, and actually get to enjoy seeing the impact of the money that you've given away, be it a family or a charity gift. Don't wait until you've gone and you don't get to see the joy it brings.
And I think that doesn't just apply to money. I'm a big fan of, has anyone heard of Swedish death cleaning? So it's this principle they have in Sweden that whilst you're alive and well, you invite your loved ones round and give them objects that have meaning to them and sentimentality, and that's quite a good way of starting conversations about financial matters as well. You know, would you like this piece of jewellery? And let's, you know,
My
lead
mum
on to
did that
something else.
with tea towels when I got my first house.
Tea towels, lovely. Okay, so there's some good, simple, straightforward things. Well, they're not that simple and straightforward. Cash flow modelling, not something you're going to do at home in front of the telly, is it? You need some help. But they are practical strategies. But let's have a look at what people do wrong. I've heard a lot about trusts, and it sounds like there's some sort of, silver bullet. Is that true, Darren? If I left the house in trust, would Nia be guaranteed to get everything when we go?
I very much doubt it.
Yeah.
One of the things we hear a lot about is people putting their house where they live, their home, into a trust. It doesn't work for inheritance tax. I mean, there are a few ways it can work if you're paying rent to whoever you've given it to, but we have never actually seen that work. We have had a client who came in once with his son and said, oh yes, I've given my son the house and I'm paying him £5,000 a month rent for it, so we're fine. It's not a gift with reservation, which means you've given something away but you're still benefiting from it. And I said, oh, that's great. And I said to the son, and you're declaring that on your tax return, aren't you? And he looked at me with a very long face because obviously he was not declaring it on his tax return. So the whole thing would have been thrown out by HMRC. The taxman's quite happy to take the tax now if you want to declare it, and then he'll probably, unless you live the 7 years, it could well be still tax or inheritance tax. So it very rarely works from the point of view of inheritance tax. And that's where we see trusts used badly. And also you do only have a £325,000 limit you can put into a trust before you pay an entry tax of 20%. And that's again a thing a lot of people are not aware of. And every 10 years, whatever the trust value is above 325,000, you pay 6% as a periodic charge. So they are complex and they can work, but generally not for putting your house in it.
What do you mean by an entry tax?
Anybody that sets up a trust of more than £325,000 in a 7-year period, now it's called a chargeable lifetime transfer, and you pay an entry tax of 20%. It's actually an advance inheritance tax charge. And if you do die in 7 years, they will offset that against the inheritance tax, but it is an advance charge. So it means it's rarely beneficial to pay in more than £325,000 into a trust.
Okay, so that's knocked on the head. Are there any instances when trusts do work? Can you give us any examples?
Trusts work in lots of situations, particularly if someone wants to keep control of the money. Maybe they're not sure that their children should have the money at that time in their life. Maybe they're in a relationship that you're not so sure about and you want to ensure that it doesn't end up in the wrong hands. There's vulnerable beneficiaries, etc. But also we find a lot of people setting up trusts where they want income, they want to know they've got a steady income coming in, but they don't need the capital. And they want to be able to push the capital outside their estate, admittedly over a 7-year wait, but the growth on that money is instantly outside the estate. and we can set up trusts where the income can come back, so someone's got the sustainable income they need, but we're pushing the capital out and trying to reduce the inheritance tax over time. I mean, that works really, really well. I mean, we see a lot of grandparents setting up school fees trusts. There's a nuance in the law where if you set up a trust for a grandchild and the grandchild uses that money for education, there's no, extremely unlikely there's going to be any tax when they access it for school fees, which is another night's conversation. But in essence, if the parent sets that trust up, then the child accesses it under the age of 18, the parent has to pay the tax, as Angela Rayner found out when she tried to do it with her house.
Yeah, that one hit the headlines, didn't it? Yeah. Okay, so it does work sometimes. There's another thing though. What about making all these things work together? You see a will that says, I'll split everything 3 ways, but somebody's got some pensions, and they've got some ISAs, and they've got some property. In fact, I've been in this situation myself when I lost my own mother, and it's not fun, and it's not fair. What can we do about that?
Again, a lot comes down to what you've planned before. The will is the starting point of everything, but when we see people come in, they've left certain items or assets to certain members of the family, how do you value those equally? For example, a house is illiquid, but you could probably sell it for cash, although there's cost in selling it. Something like an ISA is just easily, readily available. A pension, and we have seen this where people have been gifted the pension, they don't realise that there's tax when they take the money out. Even forgetting about the inheritance tax, it's taxable when someone dies after the age of 75. So in effect, leaving a pension to someone who's at higher rate or additional rate taxpayer is not worth anything as much as leaving them a property on which they won't pay any tax when they sell it. So it can end up with arguments. We've seen situations where a additional rate taxpayer is like, I don't want the pension, I'll take less, but can I have some of the house and ISAs, which would be more beneficial for the brother who didn't work, but he wasn't so keen on doing a deal that would benefit his brother. So we see all sorts of arguments, and is it the net return to the beneficiary that the estate's supposed to be doing, or is it just the gross amount? So it's really important that wills are kept up to date more than ever, and making sure everyone is aware of who's going to get what, or is it purely going to be a direct split across the beneficiaries.
So what you're saying is that all these different financial tools sort of speak a different language, play a different tune, and without somebody at the centre sort of conducting that orchestra, you can get contradictions and things that don't work in harmony.
We have had so many problems with a family after the death of a loved one. We have 2 clients, and they were the bestest brother friends, lived 2 doors away from each other. One was down on his luck, moved into the family house with the mother, and it was in the will, it was all written that he could stay there for 2 years after the mother died. He decided 2 years after she had died that he couldn't afford a house with his share of the house, so he's still living there 5 years later. So the brothers haven't spoken, they've fallen out, it's been horrendous, and we see situations like that all the time. Where people don't truly understand the implications of what they're doing, and not everybody agrees, even legally, he shouldn't be there, but people will, unfortunately, the glue sometimes is the parent.
So what we're saying, in fact, is people think, oh, I've got a will, it's all sorted. But it's the planning, the financial planning that feeds into the will that's going to avoid these complications and frustrations later down the line.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The will is the start. We do wills for all of our clients. It's the first thing we do. It's the cornerstone of everything. If someone hasn't got a good, up-to-date will, we can't really build a financial plan or estate plan on the back of that. I mean, it's just so important to have a will. We're doing a lot more clients with tenants in common and what are called a nil rate band trust, because people are dying and then basic rates are not changing till 2030 at the earliest. If someone dies now and the survivor lives for 7, 8, 9 years, given across a 325,000 allowance, is nothing up to putting that £325,000 into a trust on death, which could double in value before the next person dies. So we're seeing a lot more nuances in wills, a lot more people moving property from joint ownership to tenants in common in order to try and move money out of the estate as quickly as possible.
So if you're thinking of putting your will together, and it isn't just a straight three-way split, which is what perhaps, assuming there's three of you, what people would expect, what happens then when somebody does pass away and then the family gets this huge shock and says, oh, I thought it was just all going to be split equally. I didn't know they were going to spend every last penny or put it in a trust or...
Again, it's that the family conversation is that everybody's best to know what's going on. We see a lot of issues with advanced gifts where one of the families down on their luck, the parent gives them some money to buy a house, and that all seemed great. The will was changed to say, oh, I've given Bob some money, so he's not going to get any in the will. 20 years later, unfortunately, Bob's died. His children are expecting money from their grandparents. They don't get any money because the will was changed to just give it to his sister, and the grandchildren complain. We have actually seen that on 2 occasions where they said they believed they were getting money, and everyone forgot that their father had a gift in advance 20 years before. We had a situation where a family member died. The husband lived for another 25 years, never changed his will, and the family had always promised that his dead wife's brother would receive some money. But when he died, turned out the will had the name written back to front. It was a Scottish name, and it could have been written one way or the other. He died 10 years before, and even though his children then wanted their money, they couldn't prove it was the same person because of the address. It said brother when it wasn't his brother, it was his wife's brother. So all these little nuances ended up in High Court because everyone was fighting over what was £100,000. So it's so important to keep those wills up to date and everybody to be aware. If you're going to give money to someone and not to someone else, write it down, have an extra letter, put it in the will as to why you've made these decisions.
I suppose if you've spoken about, in that instance, openly as a family, somebody might have said, oh, hang on, that's not his name, or, oh, he died years ago. And then that would have been a prompt to update it, wouldn't it? But it's not always easy, though. I mean, I think there's probably people here today, not just for the IHT information, but for the piece about how do we even begin to talk to our families about this. Ladies, do either of you have any thoughts on this?
I think that's why we can play a really useful role actually in that, you know, these conversations can be tricky and sometimes it's really helpful to have a neutral person there that can do it with experience, with, you know, sensitivity and with tact, and to help facilitate some of those difficult conversations. And that is something that we find that we can do, and it's so much better to do that sooner, before problems arise, than it is to wait until there's a problem further down the line.
Yes, maybe having a professional involved takes a little bit of the heat and the emotion out of it and makes it a more practical step. Kat?
I was going to say, money can really bring out the worst in people. And it can be very, and I can reflect my own family here, it can be very, very awkward having the conversations about money. But it is always going to be better to sort it out whilst you're still around and you can explain what your wishes are and have it so legally drawn up, than allowing the bun fight to proceed after your death, where families get ripped apart, and
Nobody wants that.
It's really sad. And as I said, like £100 pot, it's a lot of money, but when you get legal fees involved, disappears. So yeah, if you've got some challenging conversations to have, do it while you're alive.
I think sometimes
The best place to have the conversation is to take the family on holiday. And
spend money at the same time.
Spend your money at the same time. I mean, I've got one client said to me, he said, I travel first class so my children don't. That's a bit harsh. But he also said to me, he said everything he looks at now, he gets a 40% discount on. He just has it in his head that, you know, it's a 40% discount because of it. So I mean,
did he read your book down?
He did. So I was just a book here that It's from
You
a
didn't
Bill,
write it.
Bill, I didn't write it,
No.
a chap called Bill Perkins wrote it, but it's Die With Zero, and it's really about living your money, and I spend most of my time helping people spend money. We're financial advisors, we're not investment. Yes, we do investments, but you know, it's why. We're all about the why do you need this money? What do you want to achieve from it? And ultimately, we want everyone to live their best life, and this book really shows you how to live your money.
Brilliant. Another thing, when we give you packs later, we've got a little booklet in there called My Important Documents, and it's a place that you can write down all your assets, whether they're financial assets, all the gifts, the pieces of jewellery, and your wishes, and actually filling that out, maybe involving the family in that is quite a good starting point, isn't it? And then there's a written record, nothing comes as a shock to people, so. Okay, so moving on to the next section. What we can actually do to help. And I think some people might be thinking, well, hang on, we're talking quite a lot about wills here and lasting powers of attorney, but you're not solicitors, you're financial advisors. Isn't that what my local solicitor does?
Absolutely, and I think over the last few years, and especially with the pensions coming into inheritance tax, I think solicitors are great. We work with lots of good solicitors. You know, they're great at the words, they're not always so good at the numbers, the strategy, and what the tax implications are. So we're finding that as financial advisors, over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been pulled more and more into probate, into estate planning, and working alongside solicitors, because it's all about the numbers now. And you know, our strategy's always been, you know, plan, spend what you can, gift what you can, trust, and protect what you can't give away. So it really is a balance between working with professionals. We do come across a lot of will writers. I can't say I'm hugely enamoured with how they behave in a lot of occasions. They're rarely regulated. They have seem to have a habit of trying to have people put their houses into these trusts or do equity release for inheritance tax planning, all things that are heavily frowned upon by HMRC, and they have to be, if they do work, they have to be done very well and very specifically. And we have unwound a number of situations that have been set up by will writers who have charged huge amounts of money, which wasn't necessary. So it's using a professional, we're regulated. You know, we follow a very high level of code of conduct to ensure that, you know, you'll get a good outcome when you work with us.
As you say, we work together with lawyers very often,
Yeah.
or sometimes we do the wills, the legal mechanisms ourselves. It's whatever works best. There's a few little pointers on the slide there about the whole process that comes before you actually get to the will bit, which is with the outcome, if you like. So, Kat, supposing somebody says, okay, right, I need to do something about this, I need to start planning my estate, and they decide to come and see you, what would happen at that first meeting? Because I think some people go, oh, it's a bit scary.
I'm not scared.
No, of course you can.
So what happens? Well, we love people to come into the office. We do a lot of things on Teams nowadays, but we have an office just over not far from Ness on the Standard, and we like to get people in the office and meet people and really get to understand the situation. Like, it really hit me when I started this role, like how people just open up their lives to you, because there's two parts to it. I always think there's the maths, which actually, if you've got the time and the inclination, you can sit and do the maths yourself, and if you're really keen on it, you can do all the projections and everything. But the really important bit is unpicking, I said, what you want life to look like, and like how you want that money to be spent, and it's really getting to understand you is the bit I love anyway. The technical stuff is interesting, but it's the people that are interesting.
And you're very good at it.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, it's kind of like the maths thing, but then there's the exciting bit of actually, what do you want life to look like? How many holidays a year do you want? Do you want a new car? Do you want to move house? Do you want to downsize? Do you want to upsize? Do you want to go around the world? That's the fun thing, and then my job is to sort of do the number crunching to allow you to lead that lifestyle, essentially. So we do a lot of conversation around that, a lot of chat with me. Yeah, and I think we sort of get into the nitty gritty really, the cash flow, and try and keep it simple, because there's a lot of jargon in financial planning which I think puts people off, but actually it's relatively straightforward. So I'll try and decode it for you.
Well, I'm glad you think it's relatively straightforward because I don't. No, but you all of you do a really good job of making it clearer, helping us see the wood for the trees. And Rachel, we've talked about using solicitors for wills, but also we've recently started doing probate. Is that, I think again, people aren't aware that you can go somewhere other than a solicitor for probate. Why would you? Because they do a great job.
That's right, yeah, they do. And as Darren said, we work with solicitors a lot and with other professionals. Yeah, it's a common misconception actually that you need a solicitor to do probate. That's not the case at all. We do probate for quite often for clients who may have passed away, or for clients who have a family member who's passed away. We're doing some of those at the moment. And one of the big advantages, and one of the things that our clients really appreciate, is when you do that, we've already got the picture. We've got the overview of the estate of the person that's passed away. We, in lots of cases, would have the bigger picture of the wider family as well. Next generations down and what that client might have wanted to happen. We may even have the will as well and have done the planning with that person. So we've got the overview, but also it means quite often then we also have the detail as well. We might have access to the assets and the detail of what's going on. Another really important thing is that we can then support with the management of those assets whilst going through probate, or the management of those investments, which is really important because that's a legal responsibility for executors, that they do make sure that happens whilst the probate is going through. So that's a really key advantage that we can bring. And also it means that we can have that kind of continuity of relationship, which a lot of clients appreciate. Yeah, so it's not just the practical support. You know, people can do probate themselves if they feel inclined to do it, although I wouldn't recommend it.
I've done it 3 times.
It's not fun. I wouldn't say it's the most fun thing to do, but it does mean that, you know, we often know the clients, or we know somebody within the family already, so we've kind of got that the lead up to the situation, as it were. We can support through the situation as it's happening. And then, as you know, we kind of hopefully smoothly come to a close with the probate, we can then support with the next steps as well. So that might be trust, looking at how people want to use something they may have inherited from the will, or how that's going to be allocated and invested. So we can really do the whole journey.
Yeah.
And we may work with solicitors along the way to do that, but it does mean that we can have that overview and that continuity. And, you know, it's great because we can offer that personal service. People can come in, you know, we're on the end of the phone. And a sympathetic ear.
That's nice. And I know we've got some families that we work with multiple generations, and the older generations already saying, right, I know my grandchildren are going to inherit lots of money. Help me prepare them.
Right.
I don't want them to get it and then just behave like pools winners.
We do get it, absolutely. I mean, we do find that if we can work with a whole family, everybody trusts everybody, everyone knows everyone. There have been some scams, quite a lot of scams where people have been on their own, they've not died, but people have pretended they died, created a will, gone for probate, and requested the money. I mean, we've had it happen to a client's great auntie, and because she wasn't at her house for 6 months staying with her son, someone just decided that she died and created a will, faked a will, and claimed probate. And had the house transferred into his name, which he then sold to his friend, super cheap. And then she came back one day to get some bits and pieces, and all the neighbours came out and said, "Oh, Muriel, we thought you died," and she's like, "Fine."
Muriel wasn't her
no, it
real
wasn't a real name. It wasn't a real name. But ultimately, it ended up in the High Court, and it took, you know, a couple of years before they actually worked out that she was alive, and it was actually her house. So, the more we like to be involved with not just our clients but our clients' families, so as and when the day does come, we know the executors, we know the family, they know us, and we know we can move that probate forward as quickly and smoothly as possible. Makes a huge difference.
That's great, good. Well, I think we're going to start wrapping up the main section now before we move on to questions, but I just want to, before we do that, look at first steps, how we get our house in order. And I'd like to ask each of you, if there's one thing that you think people should take away from this evening, what would that be? What about you, Rachel? I messed you up then, didn't I?
Well, I'd say, you know, get organised, have your conversations now rather than wait till it's too late. But if there's one thing I'd say in context of today, with the pension changes coming up, is make sure that you've got that expression of wish done for your pension. You've got something clear on your pension that's up to date, saying where you would like that to go and what you would like to happen to it.
Lovely.
And I would recommend, from personal experience, you'll all get one of these in a goodie bag, and my important documents. Go through every scrap of paper. You know, you just get these random policy things that come through the post, and you know, what is that? We'll put it back. Find out everything that's in your name and what it is. I did this and found a pension that had grown by, I think it was about, well, a minute amount, 5% in 5 years, something like that. And I was so annoyed because I thought, actually, if I put that into a proper pension, I could have got some really good growth on that. So find out what you've got, and old pension pots, random policies, find exactly what you've got, put them in my important documents. A, you might be able to spend them, or B, it makes life easier when you come to planning. So yeah, just know what you've got.
Great tip. Darren?
I've got so many things, but I'll just keep it short. Yeah, I mean, make a plan, speak to the family. I mean, leaving a legacy is in your power, and paying IHT is again in your power. So it's really speak to everybody, make a plan, enjoy your life, and die with zero, as they say.
This is an educational event and does not constitute advice. Will writing, powers of attorney and probate are not part of the Quilter Financial Planning offering and are offered in our own right or by referral. Quilter Financial Planning accept no responsibility for this aspect of our business. Tax and inheritance tax planning is not regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.
Just thank you. I'm really, really delighted to see such a fantastic turnout, especially on such a miserable evening in February. So thank you all so much for making the effort, and I hope you found it useful, and I hope to see you again sometime. Thank you.